Medicina Omeopatica, che oggi desideriamo qui onorare. Perciò, in qualità di presidente organizzatore, a nome di tutti i medici e pazienti omeopatici, desidero ringraziare il dottor Pino Galeota, presidente dell'Ufficio del Turismo e dello Spettacolo del Comune di Roma, la cui alta sensibilità culturale ha reso possibile l'organizzazione di tale evento. E a lui do la parola.
Grazie, buongiorno. Io noto sempre che nessuno si siede in prima fila, c'è sempre un timore reverenziale. Innanzitutto buongiorno e soprattutto ai colleghi stranieri un benvenuto da parte della nostra città. Compito di un'amministrazione comunale che io condivido, sostengo e aiuto, favorisco, è quello di dare l'opportunità anche a, diciamo così, ad eventi, a iniziative, a momenti culturali che trovano difficoltà di potersi esprimere, di poterlo fare. L'omeopatia è uno di questi, diciamo così, di questi segmenti che trova difficoltà ad esprimersi. Sappiamo benissimo, non la faccio lunga, intorno all'omeopatia è un dibattito che dura da tempo e continua a durare. Gli interessi intorno a questo sistema non ve li racconto io, perché ognuno di voi credo che li capisca e li conosca, e a maggior ragione dico questo, perché proprio schierandoci dalla parte di coloro i quali hanno maggiore difficoltà, un'amministrazione pubblica crea cultura, crea opportunità, crea confronto, crea dibattito, crea occasioni di conoscenza. Ecco, io sono stato spinto da questo, non essendo un tecnico del settore, conoscendo indirettamente il confronto, conoscendo anche ovviamente quello che gira intorno alla salute. Io vi ringrazio per l'attenzione. Questo è uno splendido posto che abbiamo recuperato in questi ultimi anni, serve per tante iniziative. C'è qui il mio amico Paolo del municipio che ci farà un'iniziativa di carattere culturale con pittori eccetera. Crediamo che i musei debbano diventare questo luogo di incontro per tutti coloro che pur amando questa città non trovano degli spazi per potersi esprimere. Ecco, noi siamo qui apposta, ne faremo anche di altre cose nella prossima legislatura, abbiamo in mente di fare altre grandi strutture soprattutto per poter esprimere a chi ha difficoltà di farlo, ma anche coloro i quali a Roma si chiamano gli amatoriali, i quali hanno necessità di salire sul palco e di poter stare meglio, perché se uno si esibisce e si fa vedere, si sente meglio, credo che ce ne guadagni lui stesso, la famiglia, la società e allo stesso tempo tutti noi. Grazie per l'attenzione e benvenuti. Grazie.
Ok.
Sì, questo è uno spazio, come ricordava Pino, recuperato da un po' di anni, è un casale del 600 ristrutturato dove facciamo tantissime iniziative artistiche, culturali in genere, di musica, di danza e altro, soprattutto interculturali spesso e anche su altre vicende. No, siamo stati molto contenti di ospitare insieme alla sovrintendenza, che ringrazio perché insomma, le iniziative che il municipio realizza qui dentro in collaborazione con enti e associazioni, in questo caso rispetto anche a questa iniziativa, le facciamo tutte con la sovrintendenza e ringrazio sempre il personale che ci aiuta e ci dà una mano in questo senso. No, siamo stati molto felici con la dottoressa Benocci, che è la sovrintendente di Villa Pamphili, la responsabile appunto di tutta la villa per quanto riguarda la sovrintendenza dei beni culturali, di ospitare una cosa sull'omeopatia. È la prima volta che l'abbiamo fatto, ma quando ci è stato proposto l'abbiamo accettata subito con grande felicità, devo dire. Tra l'altro io mi curo, mio figlio non ha 6 anni ma ha ancora preso un antibiotico perché ci curiamo con l'omeopatia e credo che l'omeopatia abbia bisogno di una giusta dignità, lo ricordava Pino, insomma sono anni che ruotiamo intorno a questo discorso e in altri paesi d'Europa l'omeopatia sta un pezzo avanti e viene riconosciuta con la dignità che merita, mentre qui ancora siamo quasi come dei carbonari a fare queste iniziative come se stessimo facendo chissà che, parlando di cosa. perciò bene che siamo qui per un mese per parlarne e spero che insomma tutte le persone che passino per Villa Pamphili anche casualmente possano entrare qui dentro per capire un po' meglio questo mondo affascinante che è quello dell'omeopatia e magari entrarci dentro con tutte le scarpe. Grazie.
Allora, naturalmente continuano i ringraziamenti che sono sempre pochi. Allora ringraziamo il sindaco di Roma Walter Beltroni, ringraziamo anche il vice sindaco Maria Pia Garavaglia che ci ha concesso l'alto onore del patrocinio, e quindi ringraziamo naturalmente il sovrintendente dei beni culturali, il professore Eugenio La Rocca, la direttrice della Cascina Farsetti, dottoressa Carla Benocci, e naturalmente un ringraziamento particolare alla casa farmaceutica omeopatica Cemon di Napoli, che è stato lo sponsor ufficiale, e il suo presidente, dottor Aurelio Rocco. Grazie e un applauso. Bene, siamo qui dunque per parlare di medicina omeopatica pura, unicista, così come la intendeva il dottor Hahnemann, ovvero quella esente da miscugli e complessi, in grado da sola, se appresa con uno studio profondo, coscienzioso e completo, di assicurare il successo nella cura e soddisfare i bisogni dell'umanità sofferente. Così come disse Hahnemann il 17 novembre del 1839, nel suo discorso a Parigi, dove aggiunse che non voler apprendere o far conoscere questa verità basata sul principio dei simili dalla natura eterna è un crimine. I veri seguaci di questa arte medica non invasiva hanno curato e curano da 200 anni milioni di persone, anche famose come Madame Curie, la scopritrice del radio, il musicista Paganini, alcuni papi ed attualmente la regina d'Inghilterra, risolvendo casi clinici molto complessi e gravi, potendone verificare la grande valenza preventiva e curativa in ogni età, a partire dalla preparazione al parto, alla gravidanza, nel rispetto della eugenia. Per esempio, durante la gravidanza, momento assai delicato, in cui non è possibile sovraccaricare con i rimedi allopatici ponderali gli apparati psicofisio-immunoendocrini, sia nella puerpera che di riflesso nel nascituro, l'omeopatia si è dimostrata di grande utilità. Così pure nelle fasi dell'allattamento, quando il neonato è in collegamento diretto con la madre, ne assorbe direttamente attraverso il latte tutti i nutrienti, sia salubri che tossici. Così dicasi nelle fasi di sviluppo ossologico del bambino, ambito in cui l'omeopatia pediatrica si è dimostrata una terapia preziosa, perché dolce e rispettosa del terreno biocostituzionale individuale. Per tale motivo essa dovrebbe essere presente soprattutto nel mondo scolastico, a partire dall'asilo, il luogo dove si formano le future generazioni, e che tranne alcuni screening saltuari non è ben monitorato, e ve lo posso confermare personalmente, perché vivo la realtà scolastica sia come docente di scienze motorie che di medico. La sua grande efficacia si è anche evidenziata nella cura delle patologie croniche, delle allergie, per l'assenza di tossicità, laddove i mezzi o biodegradabilità del farmaco da parte del fegato non può essere ulteriormente sovraccaricata, sia da un rimedio che tantomeno da molteplici rimedi allopatici, ponderali, per non far sviluppare epato o nefrotossine responsabili di malattie iatrogene. Così anche nel mondo dello sport si è dimostrata una valida ed efficace terapia sia nella prevenzione che nella cura dei traumi, ma soprattutto a parità di effetto rendimento ha fatto desistere gli atleti dall'assumere integratori ed anabolizzanti o farmaci dopanti. Questo è quanto afferma la storia della medicina clinica omeopatica di valenti colleghi di Europa, America, Asia, che hanno lavorato e lavorano privatamente o presso ospedali famose come il Royal London Omeopathic Hospital, fondato dal dottor Qui, già studente del maestro Hahnemann, a Londra nel 1848, dell'Hôpital Saint-Jacques di Parigi, dell'ospedale di Stoccarda, di Filadelfia e perfino in India, in New Delhi, presso i quali esiste da sempre un'ampia documentazione di cartelle cliniche. Naturalmente la medicina omeopatica ha da sempre avuto acerrimi contestatori, dal mondo allopatico, ma ciò è comprensibile, poiché la cura allopatica impiega il metodo dei contrari e la dose ponderale. Perciò i contestatori non possono concepire la cura del rimedio infinitesimale e secondo il principio dei simili, perché non l'hanno né studiata all'università e né tantomeno mai applicata. Hahnemann diceva a questo proposito che lui parlava e commentava soltanto ciò di cui aveva avuto esperienza diretta. Questi sono i postulati fondamentali su cui si basa la medicina omeopatica, peraltro già noti ed usati dal padre della medicina Ippocrate di Coro, il quale ricordo che nel suo trattato del morbo sacro diceva: se curerai il caldo col freddo, il corpo si riscalderà e non otterrai lo scopo, ma se viceversa lo curerai col caldo, il simile, allora otterrai la guarigione. Egli esprimeva appieno il concetto di omeopatia. A queste contestazioni nel corso dei secoli se ne sono associate altre incentrate prevalentemente sulla mancanza del principio chimico del rimedio, ma se questa critica poteva reggere un secolo fa, oggi, premesso che essendo diversi anche i metodi di cura, si dovrebbero osservare due verifiche metodologiche diverse, oggi, alla luce delle nuove scoperte scientifiche, tali osservazioni sono completamente superate e vediamo perché. Se consideriamo le dinamizzazioni decimali della farmacopea tedesca Ab, si è visto che la loro concentrazione molare è identica alle concentrazioni plasmatiche delle citochine, delle chemiochine e degli oligoelementi e alle interleuchine, proteine messaggero tra macrofagi e linfociti B e T. Esiste inoltre una macchina italo-giapponese che riesce a misurare concentrazioni dell'ordine di PPT, peso per trilioni, dei minerali presenti nell'habitat, nell'acqua, nel siero, nelle urine e nel capello di una persona. Grazie a queste analisi è possibile varie patologie e questa è una realtà. Infatti la regione Puglia, visto l'alto inquinamento da minerali nella città di Taranto, con il più alto tasso di tumori in Europa, ha ricevuto un finanziamento dalla Comunità Europea per aprire una clinica specialistica per effettuare delle terapie risanatrici. Riguardo alle potenze centesimali e 50 millesimali, che hanno ulteriormente detossificato il principio chimico tossico, contengono pur tuttavia un'energia elettromagnetica curativa rilevabile con la macchina Kirlian, con cui sono stati fotografati molti rimedi e alle varie dinamizzazioni, i quali hanno mostrato differenti campi elettromagnetici o auree. Questi campi di forza vibrazionali ci indicano un'attività biologica in corso ed è proprio questa la forza curativa che, somministrata nel rispetto della legge dei simili, va a curare similmente la forza patologica presente. Se pensate alla energia solare, anch'essa alla sorgente è distruttiva, ma dopo essere stata filtrata dai vari strati atmosferici giunge a noi dinamizzata, divenendo curativa, tant'è vero che questi fotoni permettono non solo la fotosintesi clorofilliana, ovvero la organicizzazione del carbonio in glucosio, ma anche le cure dell'ittero, la fissazione della vitamina D e la produzione di melanina cutanea. Questo è uno dei tanti vantaggi del rimedio infinitesimale, anche se viene chiamato placebo, che di fatto non lo è, perché altrimenti come spiegare le guarigioni avvenute nei neonati e negli animali? Invece da ciò si evince la scientificità del rimedio omeopatico, che prima dell'uso è stato sperimentato su persone sane, che hanno potuto esprimere chiaramente attraverso vari sintomi lo stato d'animo, l'emozione della mente, le sofferenze del corpo e tutte le reazioni connesse, a differenza della sperimentazione dei farmaci allopatici, sperimentati in laboratorio e soltanto su animali, non in grado di esprimere e modalizzare i propri sintomi, ed inoltre una volta messi sul mercato e considerati come sicuri non lo sono affatto stati. senza fare nomi. Inoltre il rimedio omeopatico, grazie ai suoi vari gradi di finalizzazione, si può perciò adattare allo stato energetico di ciascun paziente nel rispetto della sua individualità morbosa e, quando ben selezionato all'indicazione, ha sempre prodotto la guarigione. Del resto, non è grazie al laser, energia infinitesimale luminosa, che quando polarizzata come anche la cobaltoterapia rende possibile eseguire operazioni chirurgiche ed asportare tumori? Come medico posso affermare che non esiste nessuna evidenza scientifica più fedele di quella del risultato della cura, ma tali argomenti saranno approfonditi nelle prossime sessioni. Ora permettetemi di presentare il film storico sulla vita e le opere del dottor Christian Friedrich Samuel Hahnemann, il fondatore della medicina omeopatica, che ho prodotto nel 1997, filmando tutti i luoghi dove il dottor Hahnemann studiò e lavorò, a partire da Meissen, sua città natale, fino a Parigi, dove egli praticò con la moglie Melanie e il dottor Benninghausen. Quindi auguro a tutti una buona visione.
Il 17-12-1816 gli disse: queste nascite le considero le purificazioni della mia coscienza. In questo periodo scrisse le istruzioni di base per la cura delle antiche ferite ed ulcere putride etto da Crucius. Difficoltà. Così decide di smettere di curare allopaticamente e si dirige a Lipsia per tradurre e studiare Paracelso, Van Helmont, Haller, dai quali scritti apprese l'alchimia. In questi anni visse e lavorò in ben 11 posti diversi, con un certo scrivano Glockenbrink. Poi venne iniziato alla chimica dal dottor Leonardi in Lipsia, avvenimento che citerà poi nel suo dizionario di Marquet nel 1788, dove scrive sugli avvelenamenti con l'arsenico, sull'aiuto contro i medesimi e sulla prova legale di questi. Passando da nel 1786, nel 1787 scrive i suoi segni caratteristici della falsificazione dei farmaci. Poi scrive, insieme a von der Sander, le malattie sifilitiche ed un nuovo preparato mercuriale per curarle.
Ich habe zwar schon öfters unsere Homöopathie-Ausstellung eröffnet, aber noch nie in Rom, und das ist doch eine sehr besondere Stadt.
Mi è capitato varie volte di presiedere o partecipare alla nostra mostra che abbiamo visto giù, ma è la prima volta a Roma e mi fa molto piacere che si fa vedere qui.
Und eine besondere Freude ist, dass die Ausstellung nun ins Italienische übersetzt ist. Das ist eine Premiere.
Sono contento che la mostra è stata tradotta in italiano e questo è in qualche modo una prima.
Und dafür möchte ich sehr Herrn Dannibale danken, der die Initiative für diese Kooperation gestartet hat und ja nicht nur die Ausstellung hier betreut hat, sondern vieles, was dazugekommen ist an lokaler Ergänzung und auch dieses Treffen hier.
Per questo ringrazio anche Paolo che ha organizzato anche questo convegno.
Die Kooperation zwischen Deutschen und Italienern ist, wenn sie gut ist, ja immer sehr komplementär. Es kommt dann wirklich zum Schluss etwas Gutes raus.
Aber natürlich.
La cooperazione italo-tedesca è sempre molto fruttuosa e esce sempre una cosa molto positiva.
Gut. Wir haben uns vorher verabredet, dass ich meinen Vortrag, der etwa 50 Minuten dauern wird, in Englisch halte. Das werde ich jetzt tun. Er wird freundlicherweise nachher zusammengefasst auf Italienisch.
Il mio intervento terrò adesso in inglese, in lingua inglese, dopo verrà riassunto in italiano.
Yeah, my subject, I think you do understand me like that, don't you? Okay, on the last? Good. It's better without the micro, because I get it cramped. Keep it the entire time. So my subject, the world history of homeopathy, and you heard already a lot about Samuel Hahnemann as a person. Now I will speak a bit about other topics. The world history of homeopathy is a huge topic. It comprises, in fact, the whole medical and social history of the 19th and 20th centuries, and I would have to speak about individual factors of patients or physicians for homeopathic treatment, also about traveling doctors, and from the last third of the 19th century onwards also about international networks of physicians and congresses and all that. At the same time, this is the period in which medicine becomes more and more scientific. It is the time of the rise of the medical profession, the famous professionalization, and during the 20th century, the immense growth of the medical market thanks to national health care schemes. We are also treating with the large migrations of the 19th centuries from Europe, Italy, Germany to the United States and many other things, which have an effect for the history of homeopathy and its expansion around the globe. So you see, this is much too much for 50 minutes, but I try to get at least some general lines. I assume now, and I can do this after you have seen the film, that you know that homeopathy has started in Germany and what it is all about. Homeopathists try to cure like with like. To achieve this, they use only substances that in healthy persons had a symptom which is most similar to that of the ill person. The aim is to activate the body's capability and its own life forces in such a way that the self-healing forces of the body are activated. The dosage is of particular importance in homeopathy. This led the physician Samuel Hahnemann, who lived from 1755 to 1843, the founder of homeopathy, to experiment with always higher dilutions and led him finally to the controversial high dilutions. He thought that the diluting process system today. In Europe, it is widespread in most countries, and it's the second most practiced medical system also around the globe. This is at least what the World Health Organization found out recently. It is well important in North, Central, and South America. In India, it is next to conventional medicine and the traditional Indian medicine, the third pillar of this medical system, the healthcare system. And even in Japan, there is an association of homeopathists which is rapidly growing. It has only been founded in 1998 and it has already 600 members nowadays. So, this country, which certainly shows great interest in cultural imports from the West, Japan, follows a worldwide trend. When after the great wave of success of conventional medicine in the 1980s, people became more critical about it, homeopathy was becoming an interesting alternative for doctors and patients. Since then, since the 1980s, all around the globe, homeopathy has a growing number of people who are interested in it and they turn to homeopathy. But what we see here at the same time in Japan is the phenomenon of globalization, as Chinese medicine is more and more practiced in Europe. Also the Japanese, the South Korean, and the Chinese are interested in European medical systems. And homeopathy, for example, now is even taught in Korea, in Malaysia, and other places. Where there were only a few isolated physicians in earlier time, there were a homeopathic physician in Japan in 1911. Now, these are at least growing minorities who are interested in this topic, as this is also the case here. So, there are good reasons to think about world history of homeopathy. For those who are not very sympathetic to it, they might at least understand why bad weeds grow tall, while supporters might find out why homeopathy is still so alive after 250 years after Samuel Hahnemann's birth. What do I understand under world history? Firstly, I would like to draw your attention to some developments which took place outside Germany, and in so doing I will secondly give priority to those phenomena that highlight the relationships between people and activities of more than only one country. To begin with, I will read you a bit from a letter from Paris which had been written in 1833, and it was sent to Germany. Citation: the widely famous Dr. Bousset has made a bet with 4 other physicians and is conducting public experiments with homeopathic treatments in his hospital, Val-de-Grâce, Paris. He receives great encouragement from his friend, the military physician, Dr. Jourdan, who has been practicing homeopathically in Alsace for half a year with great success. Homeopathy is generally making overwhelming progress in France. The pure pharmacology and the von Brönninghausen relatori, 2 fundamental works of homeopathy, will be published in a few months' time, translated by a society of French physicians. Not a single copy of is left in the bookstores of the French translation of the Organon and the Chronic Diseases, which are the 2 basic works of Hahnemann, the fundamental homeopathy. The young physicians in France are really taken by the new healing method. In a month, the French translation of the 5th edition of Monsieur Taillar's Organon will be published. We also have a homeopathic journal in Paris, now which will no doubt prosper as it is published by knowledgeable and conscientious men. They are 2 wealthy physicians from Strasbourg who speak French and German with equal fluency. A homeopathic society has been founded in Paris, to which already more than 20 physicians belong. Professor Marie has 150 patients in his big hospital in Bordeaux, and he treats them exclusively with homeopathy. End of this letter. This letter supplies a number of building blocks for a world history of homeopathy. Public hospital treatments, in order to convince colleagues and patients, physicians forming associations in order to learn from each other, translations of books already appearing in revised editions, journals are founded in the French language. There seems to be a run of young physicians to homeopathy and on the booksellers, and all this does not only happen in Paris, but also in the province, in Alsace and in Bordeaux. And lastly, the letter itself is an example of homeopathists exchanging information across the borders of their countries. In doing so, they naturally given an active picture of what is going on. The young doctors are seen as a guarantee for the future of homeopathy. It's a topic. There are also concrete examples of the advantages of this kind of networking. Hahnemann himself launched a press release, a declaration to the press in 1831 in order to protect an Hungarian colleague in Roma, which is situated between Vienna and Budapest, who was threatened with imprisonment because he was practicing homeopathy. Although it later turned out that this suggested imprisonment was only made in private by a local physician, this case shows, nevertheless, how fast homeopathists could respond to such rumors even across borders. Hahnemann was generally very clever in his way to use the media. In 1792, he attracted the attention of the entire German Reich, and beyond when he criticized the imperial physicians for treating Emperor Leopold II inadequately when he had fallen ill. He accused them of weakening the sick sovereign even more by meeting him repeatedly and of inaccurately documenting the case. The rumors surrounding the sudden death of the German emperor served alone to make a large public interest in homeopathy. This was a very good public relations action, to say in our terms. On the other hand, Hahnemann was also apt at turning news from distant countries to effective use for advertising homeopathy. When the terrible cholera epidemic broke out in the 1830s, a homeopath from the Galician border, the Central European Galicia, not the Spanish one, recommended to him quite early on the use of camphor against the unknown disease. Nobody knew what cholera is at the time. Hahnemann, who himself had never seen anybody suffering from cholera, published the idea and recommended also that the patients should continue to drink water. Not only in Germany, but also in France, England, and in many other countries, this homeopathic treatment clearly proved more successful than that of the conventional doctors, who often told their patients not to drink at all. In a Europe that was optimistically looking towards the future, the outbreak of cholera was seen as a fatal blow. The idea from Galicia consequently led to a real breakthrough for the homeopathists and helped them gain public recognition. Wherever possible, they publicized the healing successes of other colleagues in their own country as well as abroad. So I will now speak a bit about the media, journals and books. Let us stay with journals and books for a bit longer and follow the development of the French journal, which was mentioned in the letter from which I read earlier. The journal itself only existed for 2 years before it was closed down and merged with another publication. But there did not seem to be enough readers who were willing to pay money for it. The lack of the necessary starting capital for this kind of journal was one of the problems in this pioneering years of homeopathy, and what was also lacking was persevering editors, financially strong publishers. This meant that new journals were started regularly, which very often appeared only for 2 or 3 years. At the same time, these new initiatives show also that there were always some people coming together and ready to start a new journal, so there was an activity. This happened, by the way, much more frequently in France than in Germany, where one journal continued to be published, by the way, since 1829 until nowadays, so there was no such need to start always new journals. To give you a bit an idea about the international development of homeopathy, we distributed here this graph, which is in German, but I will explain it to you, and I show it to you also here in German. So these are the new publications of homeopathic journals every year, and they are grouped together in continents. And you see here on the upper part, this is the total of all the new journals for every decade in the world. You see that the Europeans first are the most important publisher, but already in the 1860s, the Americas, and this means mainly North America, mainly the United States, not even Canada, they started slowly, but then already in the 60s they take over. They become the second most important territory, continent of publishing journals. And they continue to be on the first place while the Europeans are all the way down here. And that is an interesting phenomenon. This year is India, the lowest one, and you see they always continue to publish even during the British Empire in the 20s already, a couple of homeopathic journals. And nowadays they are on the first place in homeopathic publications. Here at the end they are the leading group. Now again the Europeans publish a bit more because there are many new journals in Spain, in Central European countries which started in the last year to be interested in homeopathy. So this gives you a bit an idea of the general development, and it also shows the flat period of homeopathy, which was from the 1910 to the 1970s. There's not much going on in this time here, but then again, you see the renaissance to a certain point of homeopathic publishing. And I think it's one of the ways which is useful to give an idea about the development of homeopathy. Another point could be the translations of the organon. Mr. Danibale alluded to it already in the film. At the time, books were much more important than nowadays. People didn't have radio, they didn't have television. So to have the central work of the founder of homeopathy in a translation in their own language was crucial and instrumental for the diffusion of homeopathy. First, you see here the German original editions, 1810, 19, and so on. They show that Hahnemann always tried to take the last he had known from his practice and to put it to a new revised edition and to give it as his last knowledge to the colleagues and to be able to use it. And then you see in the 1820s there are a couple of translations to French and to Italian very early here. The Italians are the very early starters in homeopathy, and to Dutch. And the most important period of translation are the 1830s, a decade in which there is an Hungarian, Belgian, and many other translations. And just one thing is very funny. If you look, for example, at the Spanish edition of 1835, you see it has been made not from the contemporary German 5th edition. That would have been a good thing, translate from German to Spanish. But they also used the second French edition from 1832. So they mixed up a bit the last knowledge of Hahnemann and the earlier knowledge of Hahnemann, which gives you an idea of some of the problems of translating. Because you don't not always get the last and the most important and most recent things. But at least these books and these journals provide basic knowledge to people in many countries. For example, the Portuguese edition has been first published in Brazil. So you see there again really a global scope of homeopathic activity. So let us now have a look at let's say, the main group of those people who add to the diffusion of homeopathy. see physicians, lay healers, and patients. I start with physicians. Some of them decided to travel around to learn more about homeopathy. An example is the French physician Auguste Rapoux from Lyon, Lyons. He published the impressions he sampled while traveling in Germany, Hungary, Italy, and other European countries in a 2-volume book. He was the son of a physician and knew from his father, who had traveled in Germany already in the 1830s, that Stüler, for example, had introduced homeopathy to Berlin. He then wrote about what had changed until 1840, similar substances which he wanted to take from another system, homeopathy, trying to be even more exact than hanno, but he remained very skeptical about Berlin. We hear about Dr. Löwy in France. It will soon be possible to single out a few excellent medicines from the large park that he lets smell the patients, very highly diluted sepia, and he thinks that he has observed very good initial effects of deterioration, which is the sign that the medication has been well chosen. So I leave out a couple of other things. For example, he also compares the interest of students in homeopathy in Vienna and in Berlin. And he believes that the interest is in Vienna much higher than in Berlin. But he must avow that he had been in Berlin during the holidays, so he couldn't have a very good idea about the idea the homeopaths, the students might have about it. You must imagine that this traveling around was very important for homeopathic physicians at the time, as there were little or no teaching at the universities. Aside courses about homeopathy, there were no many other possibilities aside. The only other chance would have been to go for studies to the United States in the last third of the 19th century. There the homeopathic physicians had an authority. Now, that thing was very important there. It is up to, at the end of the 19th century, it's up to 7% of all physicians who were homeopathists at the time, and in certain New England states, like New York, for example, it was 15% of all physicians who were homeopathists. So you may imagine that this group had a bit larger impact even onto the university and the institutions. In Germany, even in the south, the number of homeopathic physicians never rose above 1.3% of all physicians. So you see the difference between the old European medical market, highly regulated with institutions, and the possibilities in the United States. Medical provision was mostly provided by lay healers, who among other things also offered homeopathic cures. These practitioners might be trained as surgeons, many were self-taught, others had started as mothers with experience in healing, some were pharmacists who practiced outside their normal business, and there were many other ways to become. For example, in the political upheavals around the Russian Revolution, the fact that homeopathy was very much linked to the Orthodox Church was detrimental to it after the Russian Revolution. Now that the Orthodox Church didn't have a very good position after that event. Lay healers rarely extended their activities beyond the borders of their own country. The French merchant Benoit Muir was an exception. In 1831, he had suffered from consumption and was, in his opinion, cured by a homeopath. Italian and French historians of homeopathy are arguing if this successful doctor was a homeopath from France or from Italy. Anyway, he was active in Lyon and in Palermo and in Malta. He learned in Lyon from the physician Dédier homeopathy, He received a doctorate later on in Montpellier, maybe he bought it, we don't know it exactly. And then he started a practice in Malta, which was British at that time, where he publicly advertised for patients. He had spent some time on this island because of its beneficial climate and had tried in vain to cure his own illness. Unperturbated by the fact that the British health authorities drove him out of the country, he started anew in Palermo in 1835, but went about it more discreetly with this time. He translated a manual on homeopathy from French to Italian, produced his own medications, and invented a machine for grinding basic substances. With clever advertising and setting up of his premises, he managed in only a few months to employ 6 physicians in Palermo and to treat 200 patients per day, so about 30-35 patients per physician by day. Following this successful enterprise, he also tried to settle in France. When this failed, again for the medical administration who didn't like non-physicians to exercise homeopathy, he went on to introduce homeopathy with some success in Brazil. Lay healers did thus not only have an important impact on homeopathy in their own country, but in some very rare cases also promoted it internationally, especially during the middle of the 19th century. Only since the 1980s, they have international congresses again. You might know Vitulkas from Greece, who is a lay practitioner and gives international seminars around the globe. Now I turn to the third interesting group after the physicians and the lay healers, to the patients demand. It was not rare that high-ranking patients employed homeopathists as their personal physicians. I already mentioned the Lucca court in Italy. In Lahore, in India, the Maharaja Ranjit Singh had employed the physician Johann Hartwig Honigberger since 1839. The far-reaching connections between these aristocrats around Europe certainly was instrumental for advertising homeopathic physicians from one court to another. And at the same time, it led to a favorable legislation for homeopathy in these various territories, like in the north of Italy, Lucca, or various German principalities. As another example, I would like to mention the long tradition of German physicians in Russia and at the court there of the Tsar. It was not only the Tsar who had German physicians, but also the Russian aristocracy who in their estates employed German physicians like Sir Kurakin, for example. But the demand of the bourgeoisie also sometimes led a practitioner being brought in from abroad. The lawyer and medical autodidact Clemens von Bönninghausen, who lived until 1864, a man held in high esteem by Hahnemann, practiced only once at the beginning of the 1830s in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, but was apparently prevented from continuing to do so. So he used the local newspaper to advertise his surgery across the border in the German town of Emmerich on the River Rhine. And an increasing number of patients from Rotterdam traveled there by boat, and he treated them during the 1840s. From the professions of these patients, we know that they belonged more or less to the middle class, were merchants, bakers, dealers, and teachers. They formed then an association, and finally succeeded in establishing even 2 German doctors in Rotterdam to start homeopathy in this city. So you see that the patient demand where it is expressed in this form with an association can lead to the introduction of homeopathy in the city. But this kind of cross-border activity of patients is rare. Normally they are interested in getting local aid and that is what they want. The further development in Rotterdam proved then to be much steadier with Dutch physicians who learn about it and to practice. I have already mentioned several ways in which patients from the lower classes, the poorer classes, could also experience homeopathy even without necessarily having the intention. So Russian schools and hospitals, free treatment for the poor in various medical practices, for example in Uniberger Clinic in Lahore, or a special low rate which most physicians at the time gave to poorer people with one of these chances. Another more indirect influence was the increase of reading skills among the lower middle classes during the 19th century and the growing interest in health issues, which they all had. So it is important that from the 1830s onwards, there were journals which were not only read by the physicians as we know it nowadays, but also by, let's say, cultivated people of any kind. And they published in these same journals. And on the other hand, homeopathic physicians very early started to publish books called the Homeopathic Home Physician with ideas for patients to help themselves. And these books, they were in large editions, printed, reprinted again, and always revised, edited, and some from even 1830 all the way down to the 1940s. Even in Spain in 1927 they translated a book which had first been edited in 1860. Naturally, this was a revised edition. There were hundreds of thousands of these books edited all around, so many people had themselves of these products. Let us now look at some of the other cross-national developments, starting from international political and denominational competition to international physicians' congresses up to the multinational manufacturers of medicines. Due to medical cooperation, army physicians came from England to Bombay and from the Habsburg monarchy to Italy. This was initially very positive for homeopathy. During the first two-thirds of the 19th century, for example, the Austrian army and its physicians proved to be important agents of proliferation of homeopathy in all the Habsburg countries in Italy, the south mainly, but also in the north. And the first clinical trials were going on, and often as homeopathists, for example, the Basel resident had Veronica Carstens gave a speech in 1981 to the medical faculty in Bucharest, and it was very friendly to homeopathy. So the political leaders of Bucharest, because the wife of the president of Bucharest, Ceausescu at the time, was there, they were then ready to do something for homeopathy, to organize courses and maybe to do paper to print books, which was always part of in these countries. And the last interesting example is Cuba, where in the 1990s the political situation, the economic situation was getting worse and worse because the Soviet Union did not buy anymore the sugar of Cuba to a price highly above the world market price. So the Cubans had to look for other resources, and they looked for saving money and were very much interested in homeopathy as a way to save money. So they started again a tradition which was completely interrupted since 1910. Now another important factor, the last but one, are the international congresses of physicians and doctors' associations. You might know that they started in the 1870s first in the United States and in England and in France. So every 5 years one congress took place at this time. But already in 1920 1929, the first congress was going on in Central America, in Mexico, and in 1977 even in India. So you see the globalization of homeopathy again in this example. They are important because they bring together hundreds of physicians and allow mutual training and so on. I leave out the local rediscoveries of Thomas Aquinas in Argentina and Sigmund Freud in Mexico, which somewhere and sometimes mixed up to new ideas in the homeopathy, and they try to refound this holistic medicine, but the mixture of theories is sometimes a bit strange. Our last point are the international pharmaceutical manufacturers. Already in 1865, the German company Schwabe had the good idea to publish a Materia Medica Omeopatica, which provided the standards of producing homeopathic medication. And it was directly published in 3 languages, a couple of years later in 5 languages, the 4th being Italian and the 5th being Spanish. So by setting the standards of production, they had a good chance not only to send out their medications, but also to develop local branches, and they had already by 1900 grown to 50 local branches around the world, and there were 750 in 1930. There were a couple of other firms, but none of them ever attained such an importance, aside to a certain extent the French company Hanno, which has been founded after World War II and who is important in a couple of Latin American countries, mainly Iberian countries, some countries of Eastern Europe. Training courses were organized by physicians, but they are very often organized by pharmaceutical companies who by that way give a first introduction to homeopathy to the local physicians, and naturally they try also to make them buy their products. Nowadays there is an important homeopathic lobby in Brussels, the European Committee for Homeopathy, which is composed from these different actors which I have spoken about, pharmaceutical companies, physicians, patients, and lay healers, who all have their networks and try to foster homeopathy in Europe. I leave out my last part, which was about the international self-image of homeopathy, only to say to you that from the 1860s onwards, or even from the 1830s, the homeopathists were well aware of the fact that there were an international community, and it is interesting, but I leave it out, to observe what they thought was important for them. Yeah, I think this gives you a long overview. Thank you very much for your patience which you had. It's already 2 hours that we are sitting here, and I think it's now the moment for the translators to be so nice to make just a short, yeah.